Hello, welcome back, and welcome to the new amount of subscribers I just acquired recently. This is probably the first new video of mine that you guys will be watching, so thanks, and I'm glad you're here. If you saw my community post, then you'll have an idea of what this is, but if not, I'm gonna explain it. Obviously, that's what I'm here for. Well, this is yet another video that was not on my list of potential topics and came out of nowhere, thanks to a recent development. But once the idea came to mind, I knew I had to do it. 2 months ago, I put out my review of Dracula Love Tale following its wide theatrical release. Then several weeks ago, I ended up in an ongoing conversation with a commenter named Cosplayer Queen 9878. We talked about it in comparison to the 1992 Dracula film, connected over being joint Phantom of the Opera fans who both got that vibe from it, and most importantly, shared agreements over the movie's ending. And the more we talked, the more I found myself inspired to really delve into why Dracula Love Tale is so dissatisfying for so many people in its final moments. Specifically, in a way that doesn't just make you go, oh, well, that was sad, while still ultimately understanding it, but leaves you feeling, that's so unfair, what the hell? Especially when compared to the rest of the plot. And the best way to do so, I think, is to compare it to 3 other Gothic movie endings. Those being the aforementioned Andrew Lloyd Webber's Phantom of the Opera. We will be talking about the 2004 and 25th anniversary versions. Ooh, keep these over here. We'll be talking about Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, also aforementioned, and of course, Tim Burton's Corpse Bride. So, all of which take the selfless act of love approach with their relationships about normal people, weirdly hot monster freaks. The latter of whom I refer to as such because all 4 featured have their fan bases, which I won't pretend to not understand. Especially as someone whose first celebrity/character crush was on Gerard Butler's Phantom. If you've been on this channel for a while, I'm sure you know that already. If not, I welcome you to go venture into that. Generally, the normal person is not only at the center of the decision, but actively part of it, and they display acceptance of why it must be this way even if it hurts him, and even though most viewers instinctively wish otherwise. So let's explore the difference between when that agency is given to them and when it isn't, between the endings that are tragically bittersweet, and the ones, plural, that are just tragic. So let's start off with my OGs, my babies, Christine and Erik. Oh, and before we continue, I want to show I dressed for the occasion. I knew this was the perfect shirt, and it didn't really show up on camera, but I wanted you guys to see it. I hope you like it. I felt proud of this shirt choice. I wanted to make sure you guys saw it. I assume most of you know the drill here, but it's safe to say that the 3 films to follow take the supernatural entity performing selfless act of love trope, but while I'll shorten down to Love Set Free for brevity's sake, inspiration from Andrew Lloyd Webber's The Phantom of the Opera, which itself originates from the Gaston Leroux's original 1910 novel, and is one of the few adaptations to do so. Not to mention I've seen all 3 of these other movies compared to Phantom on more than one occasion from other YouTubers/viewers besides myself, so there. Yay. Chorus member Christine Daae stuns the company and patrons of the Opéra Populaire de Paris when she reveals a beautiful hidden soprano voice, and following her debut, she reunites with her old childhood sweetheart, the Vicomte Raoul de Chagny, upon his recognition of her. She tells him she's been visited by the Angel of Music, but Raoul simply takes it as metaphor and arranges to celebrate with her despite insisting she can't. Said angel shows up to express his disapproval, putting it mildly, and is in fact the fabled Phantom of the Opera, Erik to his friends, whom the previous manager Lefebvre was paying off, occasionally causes mischief about the house, and pushed Carlotta into leaving so Christine could take over. But Christine, overcome by his hypnotic influence, doesn't realize this until she tries to take his mask off, then really starts to absorb it when she undoubtedly recognizes his voice during his disruption of El Muto. Then Bouquet's murder happens, leading her to seek comfort from Raoul as she grapples with the horror and sympathy that Erik simultaneously elicits from her. And although attempting to refute the Phantom's existence, he's still there to offer Christine the comfort she's long sought since her father died, which I think is at least part of the reason why she's so quick to buy into the idea of marrying him. However, I also believe she hadn't yet connected all the dots on Erik being her angel as well as the Phantom, having probably forgotten that's who she initially thought she'd been following that night after the hypnosis. It's not until Erik boasts / confirms himself as her teacher and, it happens in Notes 2 during the stage show and at the Masquerade in the 2004 movie, that it really dawns on Christine the deception she fell into in an effort to find solace. Again, she grapples with her complicated feelings towards Erik, asking herself how she could possibly betray the man who inspired her voice, but at the same time, how could she not when he's brought about so much destruction? Although she ends up participating in the Don Juan rehearsal, if you watch the 25th anniversary show specifically, we see how numb and disaffected she appears in frame as the characters talk around her. And after the Phantom reminds the company of the greater power he wields over them now, to the point the chorus can suddenly sing perfectly on key to his previously confusing score as if literally possessed by their fear, Christine seeks to finally unshackle herself from her grief at her father's grave, which Erik quickly becomes aware of and attempts to use in order to convince her to come back to him. And when he infiltrates yet again to be sure it's he who performs the point of no return with Christine, because that is what he does, he's an infiltrator, and she realizes it's him, between the emotions the role demands and her deep down attraction, she finds the inner sensual confidence to enthrall him just as much as he does her, if not more. Like, see the way that his hands shake when he reaches for her in the 25th anniversary show, or the dawning in his eyes as he sees her starts committing to the bit in the 04 film. When she picks up on the ulterior motive he clearly has in mind, Christine reveals him so he has nowhere to go, but upon hearing his last-ditch attempt at proposing to her, I like to believe the suggested theory from Little Lottie Wanders that her compassion gets the better of her and she unmasks him to make him escape, not expecting she'd get dragged along with him. More drama and chaos ensue as Erik goes mad with love, as described by LaRue. And Christine reaches an epiphany where, despite her telling him that the true horror he elicits comes from within, she can also no longer deny the love and compassion she has for this tortured man. So to save Raul's life, she submits and chooses to stay with Erik as he demands, proving her decision through kissing him, and only for her to suddenly be compelled to kiss him a second time shortly after. Now, it could definitely be argued her initial kiss was to distract Erik and calm him down, but her second kiss feels far more like she did it out of a sudden wave of realizing the strength of her own feelings for him. And Erik, shocked at such an overt display of overwhelming compassion, and in a way he's never experienced before, realizes his own strength of love for Christine and commands that she and Raoul leave together before the mob can discover them. Interestingly enough, in both the 2004 movie and 25th anniversary show, each of them display a certain hesitance from Christine to accept this decision after she returns to give him the ring, which itself is a gesture with several interpretations behind it, but both films show her taking her time to leave Erik behind and giving him a final look back. And I'm sure they were each influenced by ALW's working on the sequel at the time. But even so, there are gestures that speak a lot to Christine's feelings on the matter. Yes, when talking about the first story in isolation, Christine accepts what must be done. And in spite of her contrasting feelings, ultimately, she cared enough that she didn't want him to die. And who knows, maybe she'd even be ready to confront her attraction to him head-on and stay with him genuinely before he urged her to go. Regardless, there's a reason why this ending has remained so powerfully effective over the last soon-to-be 40 years. to the point these later Gothic fiction films undoubtedly borrowed from it, even if Weber himself didn't think so once. But we'll get to that movie later. Alright, water break. Mina and Vlad, 1992. This one, which ironically has the tagline, "Love Never Dies." Ha 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 ha. In Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, while it didn't start the trend of associating Dracula with the reincarnation and love set free tropes, as that honor actually belongs to Dan Curtis, and he should be recognized as such, it is the one that popularized it. You know the drill. Prince Vlad's beloved wife gets taken from him unceremoniously, so he becomes Dracula in retaliation against God, yada yada yada. Then one day he's inundated with a woman looking just like her in the form of Mina Murray, engaged to Jonathan Harker. Upon examining Mina in this movie, it's clear she's happy with Jonathan before he sets off to Transylvania, and doesn't want him to think any differently. She writes of how he worries that he isn't good enough for her, while she herself notes how he wants to be with her despite only being a schoolmistress, and knows something is wrong when she receives her first off letter from him. The only thing we see Mina wishing for outside of Jonathan is a secret desire to be as pretty and sought after as Lucy Westenra, voicing this thought as she watches her friend playfully interact with her 3 suitors, which is then pretty much granted when we see the shadow of Dracula reach out to her. And it's only after his entering into her life that Mina falters. She's intrigued by his noble status as a prince when they first meet, almost in a fairy tale gone wrong type of way. But when she starts to feel guilt for betraying Jonathan, Dracula enthralls her to combat her resistance, causing her to first start thinking she recognizes him. And in all honesty, such recognition could either be in reference to holding subconscious fragments of Elisabetha's memory, or when she caught him in werewolf beast form assaulting Lucy, even with him compelling her to forget about that latter encounter at the time. She continues to see Dracula, indulging in the forbidden affair, whose mixture of absinthe and abilities make her lucid enough to remember the past, to the point she says of his voice, "So familiar, like a voice in a dream she cannot place." But I don't think these awakened memories are entirely of his doing. I lost my place. Especially judging by how emotional he gets when Mina describes Elisabetha's grief before her death. And it is these memories / feelings that I think largely contribute to Mina's growing uncertainty. The life and mind of another is taking root in her, almost like a possession of sorts, leaving Mina herself in disarray, and away from, quote, the sensible Mina she always depended on. When she receives word of Jonathan's safety at last from Sister Agatha, she is relieved at the news, even whilst noting her recent cheating, however unintentionally, and resolves not to let him know. But she quickly regains her relief at seeing her fiancé again, even smiling at Jonathan as she walks down the aisle to meet him, which itself is juxtaposed by Dracula resorting to his violent, unfeeling nature against Lucy. Even so, it is also in marrying Jonathan that Mina comes to terms with how she truly feels towards, quote, her strange prince. And a part of her still hopes to see him again. She even leaves her window open despite noticing the weird green fog outside, at least I think she does. Like part of her already knew it was him, and is simply affirmed when it floods into her room and she feels his presence. And despite her disturbance at learning she's, quote, the bride Renfield's master covets, and her attempt to assert, quote, she has a husband, she is Mrs. Harker. Upon learning the prince is Dracula, I feel her torment when she accuses him of murdering Lucy, while also tearfully confessing her love for him and begging God to forgive her for it. Really solid delivery from Winona Ryder there, aka my celebrity voice-alike, apparently. Yeah, if you're watching this video, yeah, I haven't forgotten when I got called young Winona Ryder voice sounding like, my voice sounded like young Winona Ryder on my Wednesday and Tyler video. I've held on to that for months now. Okay. But in her tormented uncertainty about him, she asks him to turn her despite her horror and his resistance. However, once their reunion is disrupted and Mina returns to herself, she murmurs "unclean" several times in shame, and as she becomes more and more like a vampire, she is frightened by the transformation and feels guilt for what she's put Jonathan through, clearly still in love with him too. She's compelled to use her burgeoning power to defend Dracula, but to no avail. In an understanding, Jonathan allows her to be the one to complete Dracula's defeat/release, which in part is probably due to his own guilt for his encounter with the brides, even though that was in no way his fault. She calls the vampire her love as she mourns him, an act that appears to surprise even Dracula, like he didn't expect her to develop any real feelings for him without his influence. So I think it is this moment that confirms she does have real love for him to a certain degree, and as such, it compels God to make his presence known and reaccept Dracula as Prince Vlad in a very Beauty and the Beast type transformation. He asks for peace, which Mina understands and respects, and judging by the ending shot of the painting showing the prince and princess together, backlit by heaven's light as Mina looks on with a sad smile, my opinion at least, I think we're supposed to take it as Vlad reuniting with Elisabetta in heaven, as she once asked, indicating she and Mina were different souls. That, and the way Mina referred to the princess as a separate being from herself when reciting the memories. But there is a connection there, one that I'm theorizing was probably brought on by the blood of life spilt from the cross that Vlad stabbed, making contact with Elisabetta's body, especially with actually how you see that parallel with the ink spilling over Mina's portrait, the one Jonathan brought with him to Transylvania. And since there's a deleted ending of Mina leaving the castle to reunite with Jonathan outside, thank you, Better with Bob, I gather Dracula's appearance was meant as a final hindrance on their marriage, a manifestation of Mina's and Jonathan's respective doubts that nearly destroyed them, especially since Dracula first makes contact with her while they're separated. But at the same time, it did succeed in reminding them both of the love they have for one another. Jonathan realized how much he didn't want to lose Mina, and Mina saw firsthand the danger that could come from when the wrong kind of attraction is given to her. It ended up killing her best friend, after all. So while Mina may have developed a love for Vlad/Dracula, one which even Jonathan appears to recognize, it extended as far as her setting both herself and the vampire free from their bounds, allowing him peace, and herself a life with Jonathan, one in which they are both far more assured in their commitment to each other. Now we get to talk about Victor and Emily from Corpse Bride. Yay! Speaking of commitment, another fantastic example of the love set free trope is Corpse Bride, directed by Mike Johnson and Tim Burton. I was surprised to learn how many people prefer Emily and Victor as a couple, which, as an open-air scene shipper, I'm sure will surprise a fair few of you. But for me, the importance of his returning to Victoria has been clear to me since I was little. Victor Van Dort and Victoria Everglot are established to be at the mercy of their parents' societal and financial ambitions, forcing them into an arranged marriage that neither of them are sure of. But upon meeting, they quickly start to see a potential happiness in the other. Victoria sees someone who could bring an artistic free-spiritedness to her once strict upbringing. Victor sees someone who is accepting of both his talents and social awkwardness. And when he accidentally awakens Emily, it occurs after he has already committed himself to becoming both the husband that Victoria deserves and a proper son-in-law to Lord and Lady Everglot. So, of course, he'd be confused and horrified by this living dead woman who's carted him off to an underworld of fellow decaying dead, all of whom very much believe he is her husband now, in a gender-swapped abduction of Persephone type scenario. So you can't blame him for spending most of the remains of the day sequence attempting to escape despite how fun and colorful it is, because he's essentially being told, let's all sing a song about your new dead wife, but it's okay because it's really a bop. The song is really morbid, but you don't really notice when you are a kid. Oh. It should also be kept in mind that Victor never places the ring on Emily's pseudo-ring finger after completing his vows. The close-up shot shows it to be on her pointer finger. In fact, I think there's a picture in here. We got a picture. Where is it? Where is it? Nope. Wait. Where is it? Oh, I thought there was a picture in here. Ah, darn it. I could have swore there was a... Oh, it was on the front page. See? Let's see if you can see that. See? Pointer finger. So it could technically be argued that she noticed this, swapped it, and gaslit him into thinking otherwise because that's how badly she wants to believe this marriage is real. Or at least it would be if you couldn't see the ring on her ring finger already when her hand starts to come alive as Victor observes the surrounding ravens. I call this out as a movie mistake, but since I cannot imagine the insane amount of time and detail that went into animating this movie, I just let it go. His marriage to Emily is a misunderstanding, and much like with Dracula 92, it's a hindrance on whom he's truly meant to be with. Its greatest achievement for Victor being that it makes him realize how ready he is to spend the rest of his life with Victoria. Yeah, his tricking of Emily to get back upstairs is kind of cruel, but it's not like he had a lot of other options. Even inside our DVD exclusive copy of Corpse Bride, the illustrated story, what I just pulled out for you guys, it says of Victor observing the moon dance... Where is it? Well, yeah, I wrote it in the script, but I just want to read it from here because it makes me feel special. It says, at first, Victor is entranced by the vision of Emily dancing, but he is racked with guilt. He turns away from her, reminding himself of his plan to return to his true love, Victoria. Hear that? Victoria is Victor's true love. And he already recognizes that. I'll also say it adds weight to his trying to insist to Emily that she's the other woman, because even just watching her dance, however momentarily, made him feel like he was cheating on Victoria. It always broke my heart as a kid to watch him be dragged away again after that initial reunion, particularly in the POV shot of the distance growing between them as he reaches out and cries, "No! No! Victoria!" And the desperation in Johnny Depp's voice here still hits, even 20 years later. Now, that's also not to say I think he and Emily aren't a solid match either, as he does admit to her his mother's frequent disapproval and saying initially she's lucky they'll never have to meet. And it is nice to watch them find a real common ground with each other during their piano duet. I've even seen it said The Corpse Bride is about right person, wrong time. And yeah, if Emily and Victor had met each other in life before he was matched to Victoria, I could see them being together. But at the same time, I wouldn't want that to mean Victoria ends up with someone who doesn't make her as happy as Victor does, so that proves how much I care about her well-being too. Oh, and speaking of happiness, if I don't lose my place, that would be helpful. I found out last fall that Victor was originally supposed to perform his own 2-minute song called Erased after learning of Victoria's re-engagement to Lord Barkis, bringing him to the decision to marry Emily officially and find a new afterlife in the land of the dead. Notably includes these lyrics. This boring life that I had known was finally turning round, and I had heard a call that I had met the one that I was meant for, that I had found a place there after all. And now it's gone, like that, and I have been erased. Another man has come to take my place. Oh. I lost my place again. Oh. Despite his initial concerns about being worthy of her, Victoria ended up being the one to provide Victor that secret sense of belonging he'd always longed for. So to be given that opportunity so suddenly, fight to get it back, then lose it again just as quickly, hurts him deeply. So he figures he has no other choice left than to try and fulfill Emily's happiness, if not his own. Alas, however, this song was cut, even though it provides some necessary emotional layering to Victor's commitment to Victoria. But now it's gone. Like that. Erased got erased. Which is super fucking ironic when you stop to think about it. Sorry, I thought of that. I was editing, and I was like, there you go. Man, if I had a nickel for every time a Gothic-tinged musical love story film had a 2-minute ballad dedicated to the mailman lead, describing his character for the female lead in greater context, but then ultimately got cut from the final product and left fans reeling its loss, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Yes, somehow Corpse Bride managed to No One Would Listen My Boy Victor. In the same vein as Phantom of the Opera 2004. To the point that when you slow them both down, I legit think they sound almost sung by the same person, but I'm sure that's just me and my, vocal preferences, so to speak. See the newest playlist I came up with. Anyway, Victor makes his choice, and even if he wouldn't have made it without extenuating circumstances, it's not done without any ounce of affection on his part. The way he looks at Emily when she enters the church very much resembles an odd husband-to-be enraptured at the sight of his bride-to-be. And we know this expression holds weight because Emily is dressed just as she has been the entire movie. Only her wedding veil has ever been taken on and off. Completely unbeknownst to Victor, though, is that Victor has entered the venue as well after telling Barkis off. And she observes the ceremony in shocked silence where only Emily can see her. It is then that Emily finally recognizes Victoria for who she is, not the other woman, but a woman with dreams the same as hers whom she's unfairly replacing and nearly damning to the same fate, especially once we learn Barkis was behind Emily's murder. Emily ensures that she holds Victor's attention long enough to admit her wrongdoing and acknowledge her love for him, then outwardly gestures to Victoria to come take her place. While accepting his reunion with Victoria, to the point he even has the bravery to sword fight Barkis to protect her, because remember, he didn't have a sword, he had a fork. Victor is also good enough to not want to break his promise to Emily, going back to her a final time like Christine Daae does with Erik. But Emily says, "You kept your promise. You set me free. Now I can do the same for you." Then continues the Poto vibe by handing him his ring back and closing his fingers over it in finality, which, for the record, is nearly identical to a shot done in Joel Schumacher's film, and I doubt that was done accidentally. And it wasn't until my most recent rewatch that I fully realized what Emily could mean by her final dialogue. In Remains of the Day, one of the final lyrics of her backstory is, "She made a vow lying under that tree to wait for true love to come set her free." Really gotta stop losing my place. So I'm figuring it means Emily had initially believed Victor to be her true love in the matter of freeing her from the failure of her first marriage, while with him seemingly proposing to her, but in reality, she came to see that he showed up to free her from the expectation she needed to be married at all, and should instead find peace, and she's grateful for him for it. Grateful to him for it. English. Yes, you feel bad for Emily and want her to be happy, but if happiness means accepting Victor's places with Victoria, and no longer being bound by her tragedy, then I'm good with that. Which is why the ending shot of Victoria leaning on Victor after he pulls her close, as they watch Emily's spiritual butterflies disappear into the moonlight, will always be one of my favorite endings to any Tim Burton film, tied alongside Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Because that's a good movie, okay? Fight me. Alright. Water break. Mina Vlad, 2025. Now, about Dracula, a love tale. Director Luc Besson essentially made this movie just to work with Caleb Landry Jones again after the collaboration on 2023's Dogman, and more or less just pulled Dracula out of a hat of characters he could see Caleb playing. As such, the movie is heavily centered around Dracula's immortal journey to see his beloved again, so most of the supporting characters in this film are very much just that. But to be fair, the movie recognizes and addresses some of the issues caused by previous attempts at the reincarnation concept, particularly Coppola's, and gives Zoe Blue's Elisabetta/Mina more involvement and perspective as opposed to it just happening to her, even if that's just the main thing she does. Side note, I will be referring to her by several different names throughout, so for assistance, when I speak of her in the past, she's Elisabetta. When I speak of her in the present... When I speak of her in the present, prior to her memory being restored, she's Mina, and after embracing Dracula as her lost husband, she's Mina Betta. Okay, great, we got that squared away? Good. It is in her introductory monologue that lets the priest, Dr. Dumont, and the audience in on her relations with the recently institutionalized Maria de Montebello, we find out two things. After conveying an air of distance about Jonathan, the priest encourages Mina to speak true, and she basically admits that while caring for her fiancé, she does not love him. Not in the true sense, at least. Which leads her to confessing she doesn't feel like she belongs within her current time, while hers and Vlad's love theme plays in the background. Which in that context makes the idea of reincarnation feel equal to a loss of autonomy. Put a pin in that, we'll come back to that later. The next time we see her, she's evoking an unconscious memory from her previous life, her hand following the dance of flames with a far-off, mesmerized look in her eyes, to the point she's literally jolted out of the moment by the hotel matron asking her if she's cold. She looks embarrassed as she explains, "I've always loved the spectacle of fire." And it is at this moment that an escaped Maria arrives to introduce her to, quote, the one she's been telling Mina about, i.e. Vlad. Upon meeting him, she begins to experience broken-up flashbacks when he kisses her hand and his sister at the Target game, but it's important to reiterate that she was clearly experiencing such things before meeting him. His showing up just exacerbates them, giving the memories physical form, so to speak, unlike the 92 version where the past life memories only come up after. But what really awakens Mina to her past and subsequently begins to provide answers to her plight is a music box Vlad gives her, which he only does after feeling satisfied there's enough left of Elisabetta to purposely try reaching out to that identity. Though Mina resists at first, even outright fearing he's putting a spell on her, what with him hypnotically reciting to her, "In your heart, in your skin, in your soul, you feel me, Elisabetta." She's clearly drawn in by its promise of revelation. So even after learning the vampiric truth about Vlad and Maria, when she's alone in her room, she allows the music to overtake her, and with her acceptance, an unbroken sequence of her former life as Elisabetta plays out, one in which she's equally enraptured by the music, and one that made me go, "You can't fool me, movie! Now you're just doing Phantom of the Opera! Come on!" Granted, Dracula Media has apparently been working to turn Mina Murray into a Christine Daae variant since the 90s, and hell, we've even had a Phantom actor who got the job from playing Dracula beforehand, Gerard Butler, icon that he is. So Lovetale just decided to wholly embrace it, especially as a French retelling and directed by one of the producers of 2011's A Monster in Paris, so... Of course, it ends up summoning Vlad to her, and with Mina Betta's memories finally unlocked, she is able to recite the final words she spoke to him before their separation. So with the embrace of each other as husband and wife, prince and princess once more, she understandably asks him to take her, turn her into a vampire, so they won't be parted again, because by this point she's undoubtedly absorbing how she spent this new earthly life feeling like a crucial part of her was missing, while Vlad spent the last 4 centuries waiting to reunite with her. Damnation be damned, she doesn't want either of them suffering anymore. But while he fulfills her request, she is unaware of the absolute agony coming over his face as he absorbs, having never thought of the consequences of what might happen once he'd found her again. Even so, they run away back to their castle together, and I'm still trying to decide which setup is funnier. Christine refusing Raoul's date offer until Erik appears to whisk her away through the mirror via musical hypnosis after she treats his appearance, and then Raoul shows up to her suddenly empty room, or Jonathan clearly being heard in pain downstairs, which Mina promptly ignores in favor of the musical hypnosis that summons Vlad, and he whisks her away to Wallachia from under the noses of the priest and co., who show up to her suddenly empty room. She's obviously ready by this point to start anew with her husband, even finding a gown of hers he kept long preserved and dressing herself up as Elisabetta once again, assuring him when asked, God is love. He understands. And if he doesn't, he can go to hell. This establishes she knows what she's getting into and will commit herself to this life. A life that is simply about being with Vlad again, with maybe some killing to sustain themselves, but Dracula has no world takeover plot in this film. His only goal was to see his wife again and nothing else, with the occasional blasphemy here and there to remind God to go F himself. But from Mina Betta's perspective, he leaves her to fend off the sudden siege of their castle, which again, in hindsight, is completely unnecessary, then returns to tell her that if he dies, she'll, quote, regain her freedom. Side note, anyone who said, oh, oops, I skipped a part. Now I skipped. Of course she's horrified and tries to insist he's her freedom, begging him to stay while the priest tries to convince him to leave, but he ends up promptly ignoring her and trapping her in their room as she screams after him, then pleads out in vain to the two men who think they know best about her future. Side note, anyone who says Zoe Blue gave a bad performance in this film or was only here on the account of her being a Nepo baby clearly didn't pay attention to these last 15 minutes, because I absolutely feel her powerlessness and devastation. Especially when Mina Betta asks him in a fragile whisper, "Why are you doing this to me, my love?" while watching her husband age into the frickin' Crypt Keeper and struggles to hold on to her final moments with him. He manages to get out that it's because he loves her. She heartbrokenly says she loves him too, then he draws his final breath before his body dissolves to ash. Ashes, mind you, that Mina Betta is not even allowed to keep because God's breeze carries them away. Jesus. Alright, let's take a quick break and pull the pin out of the film's reincarnation translation, which I said comes off like a loss of autonomy. Of course, it could easily apply to the basic concept of the societal obligation placed on 19th century women, one Mina clearly struggled to follow in her engagement to Jonathan as she acknowledges how, quote, any young woman would be delighted by such a match. But on a personal level, speaks of his coming from a respected family and multiple societal connections in a detached, lukewarm fashion. As I pointed out before, a leitmotif of hers of Vlad's theme plays as she confesses to feeling out of her time, but specifically, it begins to play after the priest points her out as, quote, not any young woman. So the connection she makes with Maria, whom she notes, quote, it was as if she could sense that Mina didn't really belong, and also hails from another time, the Rococo period in her case, is one Mina cherished in its brevity. Maria is shown in flashbacks to be flamboyant and free-spirited in a way that both unnerved and intrigued Mina, as we can see how many smiles and laughs Maria brought out of her during their time together in a montage that reminds me of modern-day girls at a sleepover. And then when Maria first mentions to Mina that she's going to meet Vlad at the festival they've been invited to attend with him, Mina appears a bit nervous, undoubtedly concerned about how it might look regarding her engagement, but is also excited by this unexpected turn of events. Again, the carnival feels very modern and somewhat out of place, as noted by some viewers and critics, particularly in its inclusion of a haunted house attraction, but while research shows that the earliest haunted house entertainment appeared in France at the turn of the 20th century, I feel like this may have been done intentionally. 3 out-of-time souls having fun in a way that feels more akin to how we would in the present. But the loss of autonomy feels particularly notable when you consider how rather frightening the concept of reincarnation is in this film. Imagine your soul being plucked from death and placed within the body of another in a later time, one in which you are treated much differently than you were previously, and not for the better, mind you, and you're long haunted by the echoes of that previous life without much explanation for them. And since the movie makes a direct point of stating God doesn't perform reincarnation, him choosing to do so in Elisabetta for the sake of teaching her grieving husband a lesson and make him see the light again, as it were, without much regard for how it'll affect her too, feels cruel. Especially with how she goes from a wartime princess, radiating confidence and regality, owning her sexuality and protected by men, to a country woman expected to simply marry well and conform in a way that leaves her confused and lost, holding on to her love of nature and artistic viewing of the world for comfort. See how she describes winter in this movie. What can I say? As a longtime fan of the Beauty and the Beast fairy tale, stories of women who struggle to meet society's time period-oriented demands but find encouragement to be their true selves by an outsider man spurned by society will almost always appeal to me. And the movie goes out of its way to remove the iffier aspects of Dracula's pursuing of Mina from the Coppola version to assure the audience that it's less creepy and more destined, with Vlad full on expecting her returns as so he stays true to her as a result, and Mina living like something vital is missing. So, naturally, most people were pulled in. I lost my place again. So naturally, most people were pulled under by this notion and found it highly and gothically romantic, particularly in how Caleb Landry Jones performs the role. Yes, he does some not-so-great stuff to get to that point, see the nun sequence. But it's easy to forget that when you watch a stun-joyed seeing Mina for the first time, complete with slowed footage and it's her playing against it, or the explicit tear falling out of his eye, as Mina recalls telling him how she as Elizabetta couldn't survive without him. You get the sense this might not end well given the story content, but at the same time, you're sincerely hoping that it doesn't. And when it does, it's handled in such an unnecessarily brutal and cop-out fashion that it leaves you depressed and upset. Trust me, viewers, I know the feeling. Because while I may have made my inevitable phantom jokes about Dracula Love Tale, when it comes to its ending, I'm afraid it's much more akin to the infamous Phantom sequel, Love Never Dies. And on more than one occasion. Jeez. Drinking cold water, I'm starting to get goosebumps on my arms. I'm not sure if you could see that. Love never dies, except when it does. Let me explain. In Love Never Dies, we're told out of nowhere that Christine and Erik had a secret meeting between musicals that led to the loss of their virginities. Described in excruciating detail in the duet Beneath the Moonless Sky, while also refusing to explain any further on how this came to be. And in its final verses, we find out that despite seemingly achieving his end goal of Christine loving and choosing him without any form of coercion, Erik left her without any notice or explanation, in the present claiming it to be on account of what he was. And not knowing that Christine had been ready to fully commit herself to him, that she loved him and would have followed anywhere he led. In our attempts to make sense of it, fans have generally agreed that the only logical reason he would have had to do this is the inability to see her fall to ruin and fugitive life. But the show pretty much alludes it came down to his face again, even though in reality, that would have been a non-issue. Because while it might have been dark where they were, Christine was still making out with that face for a good part of the night and letting it have contact along her body, so she was cool. But instead, this entire show occurs on the basis of trying to repeat Erik's release of Christine a second time, even though she's shown to have wanted him, done not as an act of love, but as an act of unwarranted shame, and if we're being completely honest, the dreaded communication trope. But it doesn't end there. Skip ahead to the climax, and Christine is put in a position where she must choose whether to sing or not, which to everyone but her, will effectively establish the last man standing, either Erik or Raoul. While metatextually acknowledging her love for both men during the title song Love Never Dies, it becomes clear to see how much Christine regains of her truest self over the course of the performance, especially once Raoul dips out and she goes full vocal powerhouse in the final notes. Then once it is over and Erik comes to congratulate her, she acknowledges how beautiful the performance made her feel, and they sing of how it's brought to life their musical bond again before a sudden intense kiss, which would naturally lead the audience to believe this must mark their happily ever after moment. Wrong! The rest of the show's nonsensical plot has to play out, and to make a long story short, Christine gets shot in the ensuing chaos and dies in Erik's arms. And even when I was 14 years old, watching the Melbourne Pro Shot on YouTube for the first time and crying at its turnout, one of my first thoughts, even back then, was, why would you make this if you were just going to give them a worse ending, Weber? Like, the entire point of this show was to fix the original's long effective conclusion, go out of its way to claim that Erik and Christine were in fact meant to be, and to the detriment of all else because the continuity and character writing in the show suck ass. Not only that, but the story frames it as Christine having made the wrong choice by being with Raoul, and for 10 long years, she's been punished for it. Which is a whole other can of worms I won't get into. And yet, not only did she already make the right choice in wanting to be with Erik before this show's timeline even began, but when the opportunity presents itself and she does so again, she's essentially punished for that decision by straight up dying after. What the fuck, Andrew Lloyd Webber? Enough with the bipolar writing and pick a lane, dude. Do you want Christine with your self-insert character or not? Because of which, the only two things that keep this ending from completely falling apart for me are the committed cast performances and the score. Steering things back to Dracula, A Love Tale, which I find ironic that I'm legitimately compared to Love Never Dies now, since initially I compared Vlad summoning into Mina's room to how Erik first reunites with Christine, twinkly music box intro and all. While I don't think its ending is done quite as egregiously, it's definitely within a similar vein. Like Love Never Dies, the movie goes out of its way to establish Vlad and Elisabetta as each other's one and only love, with the phantomy bonus of music being a strong enough component to their bond that it's how they call out to each other. Hang on, let me just... Sorry about that. Close neighbors. Okay. Where were we? Ah, yes. Her engagement to Jonathan as Mina is a hurdle to overcome in the way of that love, making him pretty much irrelevant following his initial scenes with Dracula. Which is too bad, honestly, because unlike Love Never Dies, which tries to paint Raoul as worse than the Phantom, quote-unquote, by turning him into a neglectful alcoholic and gambling addict, Jonathan in Love Tale seems like a pretty decent dude. I found him quite wholesome in his eagerness to speak with Dracula over dinner, then remarkably brave and composed when he's first captured. I even admire how he uses his final request to hear Dracula's life story to learn how he can win the Count's favor. He's more like Patrick Wilson's Raoul in the Joel Schumacher Phantom, charming and brave and protective of the FMC, but clearly portrayed as the interloper on the movie's OTP. So to Love Tale's credit, it doesn't try to turn things around and claim Jonathan is worse than Vlad when he is so clearly not. Instead, choosing to place focus on Mina herself and give her that integral involvement in the reincarnation plot I explained earlier, one in which she subconsciously knows her soul doesn't belong to this time and its match is not in Jonathan. More water. And when Mina and Vlad feel their love come back to life and share a passionate kiss, it feels so gratifying then, because we followed along the story of him looking to find her again, and that moment has finally come. Yes, even more so than when he saw her at the Grand Hotel, because that was only him finding her. When they kiss, it marks Elisabetta having found him as well. So that's when it truly hits for both Vlad and the audience. Seriously, Erik, I don't want to hear any more complaints from you about having to wait 10 long years before seeing Christine again, when Prince Vlad II of Wallachia over here waited almost an entire 4 centuries. 400 years waiting for my wife to be reincarnated. But then the rest of the plot happens, and Minabetta's choices are suddenly and completely ignored in favor of the played-out ending of him sacrificing himself to God. Jesus. It doesn't get crueler than watching the priest insist to Vlad that he save her and then he'll be at peace for eternity. Cut to Mina Beta in their room, whimpering his name. Cut to Vlad raising his arms, proclaiming, "Let it be." And then cut back to Mina Beta sobbing, "Please don't leave me, my love." It's like, I will pretend to not know why it happens, given he's the ultimate cause of her initial death, and on the account of the 3 endings I already discussed. But while Phantom Christine, Mina Ryder, and Victor were able to understand why they were being let go, Lovetail says, "To hell with making Mina Blue understand." To me, her treatment could be summed up in the exchange I mentioned earlier, where Vlad tells her, "Elisabetta, the curse will disappear if I do, and you will regain your freedom." And she tries to insist, "But you're my freedom, my love. Where you go, I go." Which, of course, sounds a lot like when Love Never Dies, Christine told Erik, "I'd have followed anywhere you led," but then got hit with "I woke to swear my love, but found you gone instead." In Mina Beta's case, it goes something like, "And I love you, yes I love you." Where you go, I'll go right ahead. I chose to be a vampire, but you went back to God instead. Forced me to watch your ashes fly into the heavenly sky. I'm sorry. I was really proud of that. Okay. Oh my god. I'm sorry. I came up with those, Lovetail-esque lyrics, and I was just like, I'm so proud of this. I gotta use this. I'm sorry for the excessive singing. So effectively, Mina Beta is punished for choosing Vlad the same way Christine is punished twice over for choosing Erik. Even though both stories display a clear stance of saying that these are the men that they're truly meant for. Which, upon reflection, is reminiscent of how, for example, Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, cursed name, tried to have it both ways by establishing Rey and Ben Solo as a dyad in the Force, its equivalent to soulmates, only to regress Rey back to the start of her arc without said soulmate, claim to be a Skywalker for no reason, and then act like that's a good ending for her. I also saw a comment on TikTok say, quote, "The scene at the end would have been so much better if Mina Beta had persuaded him through the door that she had chosen him over a boring life of being a wife and mother, and that she'd choose eternal damnation with him over a fleeting life of mediocrity in God's embrace," end quote. Given how mundane of a new life Elisabetta had been given in her reincarnation, I do think that would have been a more effective through line, maybe even giving Vlad a stop for pause to consider the life she'd been living until Maria first found her, especially since he'd originally assumed she would be reborn as a noble woman again. Hell, I even would have accepted the ending as it is if more scenes were just added to it, like cosplayer queens suggesting to me their headcanon of Vlad leaving the castle in her name, and Mina Beta now living there with their child, since we actually don't know how much time passed during their encounter in her room back in Paris, with maybe the suggested bit I've seen going round of Mina Beta now waiting for Vlad's reincarnation, the latter of which having been done in 2013's Dracula the Dark Prince, which I watched on YouTube a couple months ago. But instead, Lovetail ends right after Vlad's death in a blatant refusal to acknowledge its inevitable fallout, just as Love Never Dies ends shortly after Christine's death, despite knowing full well that every character is going to have some sort of permanent trauma over it. And once again, what keeps Lovetail's ending from completely falling apart for me is the acting, particularly from Zoe Blue, and the score, especially when you realize that Danny Elfman, being the sick genius that he is, plays the leitmotif of Vlad and Elisabetta's theme a final time during Amen, while the screen fades to black, but cuts it off its last note for that extra emotional punch. Like, listen to the score, the opening track music box, it goes da 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 da, and so on. But then in the final parts, it goes do 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 do. Do. See? You're expecting another note there. He doesn't. That's where he cuts it off before going into the end credits. And I was like, oh, Danny, you're sick. Like, once I really started paying attention to the score and how it's used in the movie, I was like, Oh, what the hell? What the hell? Plus, he has a mournful bassoon section playing right before it. An inverse of the more intimate sounding bassoon inside the opening track music box. And doesn't that man know that the sad bassoon cover of No One Would Listen / Learn to Be Lonely, playing to Erik's signature Rose at Christine's grave, is what makes the ending to Joel Schumacher's Phantom still get to me after all these years? As it continually forces you to absorb the tragic beauty of how he never stopped loving her. Jesus. Makes sense, I suppose. After all, someone on Reddit did say that Dracula Love Tale feels like the next-gen version of Schumacher's Phantom, so whoop. But add that to the list of reasons why Danny needs to score a Phantom of the Opera movie one day, which I've been actively advocating for now since last September. I even told him as much on the video of the Love Tale red carpet premiere that he posted to his channel. You could go find that video, you'll see my comment. And I feel confident to say there's a fair chance of it happening if he were to be offered, so please, somebody offer him for me. Guillermo del Toro, I'm looking at you. Especially with Andrew Lloyd Webber potentially owing a lot to him sonically for the Love Never Dies score at this point. Coney Island Waltz, the airy, Heaven by the Sea, Beneath the Moonlit Sky, the beauty underneath, bathing beauty. It's like... Well, would it interest you to know, regarding 2026 released pseudo-adaptations of Gothic novels, it actually doesn't stop there? Another essayist I follow named Talus the Introvert released her video dissecting the failures of Emerald Fennell's Wuthering Heights earlier this month, which, if you like that movie, great. I'm kind of like, about it, but no hate to you if you liked it. And as I was rewatching it while finishing up this essay, turns out she brought up something that's perfectly in line to what I talked about here. Quote, Emerald made a big stink about the fact that Kathleen and Heathcliff are finally consummating their love, but doesn't seem to notice how doing that and then having Kathy die of a miscarriage within the text of the film is actively punishing her for said consummation. She fulfills her desires and then dies for it. End quote. Holy shit. I swear I didn't have that in mind when I went on about Mina, Betta, and Christine being punished. And come to think of it, Wuthering Heights 26 does also end rather abruptly following Kathy's death, despite in its case cutting the whole second half of Emily Bronte's novel. Now I'll be honest and say I do not care about that movie enough to be upset, as I mainly watched it out of obligation so I could properly talk about it in a later video, not this one. But it does help speak to a larger issue with these types of stories. Stories that go out of their way to support the female protagonist's desires and agency when it comes to the toxic or supernatural, painting broad strokes of how much engagement allows her to be her most... such engagement allows her to be her most authentic self, but then still plays the tragedy and or morality card by killing off either her or her love interest. That's not sad. That's frustrating. It's not a tragedy. It's a portrayal of your characters, the story you were aiming to tell, and the audience you were promoting that very story to. And don't try to tell me, for example, that that's what the dark romance genre is trying to fix right now, because most of them aren't doing a good job of it either, and for more egregious reasons. Thank God we have stories like Phantom of the Opera, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and Corpse Bride that are each able to tackle the inevitable separation between normie protagonists and supernatural love interest in ways that respect both of the characters and the audience invested in them. So it's obviously not all bad. But even so, I'd like to see more Gothic love stories following their footsteps, as opposed to what we've been getting more recently. And that's the best place. That's where I'm going to end that there. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. Please like, subscribe, share, watch more of my content, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.